August 15th, 1944. A captured chateau near Le Mans, France. In the cavernous, wood-paneled room that now serves as headquarters for Army Group B, Oberst Klaus von Lettow-Vorbeck, a staff officer in the quartermaster branch, stands before a vast map of France. The air smells of old paper, beeswax, and stale cigar smoke. Outside, the morning is still. On the map, hundreds of pins mark German and Allied units. For a week, this chart had offered grim satisfaction. The Allied breakout from Normandy was being contained. But this morning, something is wrong. A junior officer, his hand trembling, approaches with a single blue pin representing an American armored spearhead under a general named Patton. He moves it not 5, not 10, but nearly 50 miles east of yesterday's mark. Von Lettow-Vorbeck stares. A cold knot forms in his stomach. No division can move that far that fast. Not without rails, not without miracles. 20 years of studying the mathematics of fuel, food, and ammunition collapse. That blue pin defies every law he knows. It is not strategy. It is revelation, a prophecy of a war powered by an invisible, inexhaustible fire. To understand the profound systemic shock of that moment, one must rewind to the brutal, grinding reality of the war in Normandy in June and July of 1944. After the initial success of the D-Day landings, the Allied armies found themselves bogged down in a nightmare of ancient farmland known as the bocage. This was a landscape of small fields, enclosed by thick, centuries-old hedgerows, impenetrable walls of earth, stone, and tangled roots. It was the perfect terrain for the defender. The German army, masters of defensive warfare, turned the bocage into a meat grinder. Every field was a pre-sighted kill zone, every hedgerow a fortress. The advance was measured in yards, paid for in blood. The American and British forces, with their overwhelming superiority in numbers and materiel, found themselves fighting a slow, agonizing war of attrition, exactly the kind of war the German High Command wanted. They believed they could bleed the Allies to death in the fields of Normandy, that the American and British public would lose the stomach for the endless casualty lists. The German soldier, the battle-hardened Lancer, believed he understood the rhythm of war. He expected a slow, deliberate struggle, a contest of endurance and skill where discipline and experience would prevail. He expected the Americans to be cautious, tied to their roads, fumbling in the hedgerows. For 7 weeks, he was right. The front in Normandy was a brutal stalemate, fought hedge by hedge. But after July 25th, 1944, that rhythm shattered. Operation Cobra, the American breakout, was not a battle but an eruption. The German line disintegrated, and through the breach surged George S. Patton's newly formed Third Army. It did not advance. It exploded across the French countryside. The hunters of the bocage became the hunted, trapped in open fields with nowhere to hide. They built defenses on rivers, only to find Patton's armor already 20 miles beyond. They tried to retreat and found the Americans waiting. The speed was inhuman. It was not war as they knew it. It was a form of mechanized witchcraft. The German High Command, watching their maps in disbelief, saw an opportunity. This madman Patton was overextending himself, his flanks exposed, his supply lines stretched to the breaking point. They planned a massive counterattack at Mortain, designed to cut off Patton's spearheads and encircle the entire Third Army. It was a classic Kesselschlacht, a cauldron battle, the maneuver at which the German army was the undisputed master. It was the same tactic they had used to trap hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers on the Eastern Front. They massed their remaining panzer divisions, the elite of the Wehrmacht, for a decisive blow. They expected to trap and annihilate Patton's army. They expected his tanks to run out of fuel, his men to run out of ammunition, and his mad dash to end in a catastrophic defeat. They were half right. Patton's tanks did run out of fuel. On August 28th, near the Meuse River, the great armored columns of the Third Army ground to a halt. The greatest armored exploitation in modern history was stopped not by a German anti-tank gun, but by an empty fuel tank. The German generals breathed a sigh of relief, but the trap never closed, because the very next day, a miracle began. A miracle of logistics so vast and audacious, it remains one of the most stunning achievements of the war. The miracle was the Red Ball Express, powered by a philosophy the German mind could not comprehend. The instrument of this miracle, the object that symbolized the entire American war effort, was not a glamorous weapon. It was humble, ubiquitous, and brutally effective. The 5-gallon jerry can. This simple stamped steel container was a German invention, one so brilliantly designed the Allies had shamelessly copied it. But as with so many things, the Germans had perfected the object while the Americans had perfected the system. To a German quartermaster, a jerrycan was a valuable, reusable asset to be guarded. To the American GY, it was a disposable commodity. He would use it to carry fuel, then water, then use it as a stove or a seat. They were everywhere, strapped to every vehicle and discarded by the side of the road when empty. A German officer, seeing a pile of discarded American jerrycans, would have been appalled at the waste. He would not have understood that he was looking at a symbol of overwhelming, almost decadent abundance. He was looking at a nation so rich it could afford to treat a vital piece of military hardware as trash. The sound of an empty American jerry can, tossed from a truck and clattering on a French cobblestone street, was the sound of a system that had so much it had forgotten how to be scarce. This was the system that was about to save Patton's army. The logistical crisis of late August 1944 was absolute. Patton's Third Army was consuming over 800,000 gallons of gasoline every day. The captured port of Cherbourg was in ruins. The Normandy beaches were too far away. The solution, conceived by Army planners, was audacious. They would create a one-way restricted highway loop running from the beaches and depots in Normandy to the front lines. It would be open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, exclusively for truck convoys. It was named the Red Ball Express, after the railroad term for priority freight. On August 25th, the express began to roll. It was the largest, longest, most intense trucking operation in human history. At its peak, nearly 6,000 trucks were on the road at any given time, carrying everything from fuel and ammunition to food. In its 82 days of operation, the Red Ball Express would deliver over 400,000 tons of supplies to the front. The most remarkable aspect of the Red Ball Express was not its trucks or tonnage, it was the drivers. Nearly 75% were African-American soldiers. In a segregated army that deemed them unfit for combat, these men became the lifeblood of the Allied advance. They were not trained truckers, but cooks, clerks, and bakers, pulled from their units and handed the wheel of a GMC deuce and a half. They drove for days with little sleep, fueled by coffee and K rations. They drove at night in blackout, guided only by the dim taillight ahead. They drove through sniper fire and bypassed pockets of German resistance. Their overloaded trucks broke down constantly, forcing them to become mechanics on the move, scavenging parts from wrecks. Exhausted but relentless, they were the unsung heroes of the race across France. The sight of a Red Ball convoy was a truer emblem of American power than any tank or bomber, the arsenal of democracy in motion. This is the transformation the German High Command could not comprehend. Their own logistical system was brilliant but brittle. It relied on the unparalleled efficiency of the German railway network, but Allied air power had systematically destroyed that network. Bridges were down, rail yards were craters, and locomotives were burning wrecks. The German army was forced to rely on horse-drawn transport a 19th century solution. They watched Patton's armor advance at 50 miles a day and assumed he must have captured a functioning rail line. It was the only explanation that made sense within their own doctrinal framework. The idea that an entire army could be supplied over hundreds of miles exclusively by truck was a logistical fantasy. It required a number of trucks, a quantity of fuel, and an organizational genius beyond their imagination. Their failure to encircle Patton at Falaise was a direct result of this failure of imagination. Their own panzer divisions sat immobilized, not for lack of courage, but for lack of fuel. The maintenance records are a testament to the driver's ingenuity. With a severe shortage of spare parts, mechanics and drivers became masters of improvisation. The accident rate was high. The casualty rate from enemy action and sheer exhaustion was significant. But the convoys never stopped. The river of supply flowed on. Imagine a young African-American soldier, a kid from Alabama, sitting behind the wheel of a truck somewhere in the darkness outside Chartres. He hasn't slept in 36 hours. His eyes burn from staring at the tiny red tail light in front of him. In the back are 505-gallon jerrycans of gasoline, a rolling bomb. He hears a German machine gun open up. He hunches down, presses the accelerator, and keeps driving. He is not a combat soldier. He has been told his whole life he is not good enough. But in this moment, he is the most important soldier in the United States Army. The fate of Patton's entire Third Army rests on his weary shoulders. He is armed not with a rifle, but with a steering wheel and a full tank of gas. In the end, the story of the Red Ball Express is the story of how a war is truly won. It is not won by brilliant generals or by superior tanks alone. It is won by logistics. It is won by the unglamorous, back-breaking work of millions of people, from the factory worker in Detroit who built the truck, to the oil worker in Texas, to the merchant mariner who crossed the Atlantic, to the engineer who repaired the road, to the young, tired driver who refused to stop. It is a story that defies the romantic mythology of war. It is a story of systems, organization, industrial power, and the quiet, often overlooked courage of the men and women who make the system work. The jerrycan, that humble, ubiquitous steel box, is the perfect symbol for this truth. It is a unit of measurement, but it is also a symbol of a promise. It is a promise from a nation to its soldiers that no matter how far you go, we will find a way to keep you supplied. We will build a highway through a war zone. We will create a river of trucks. We will move mountains of steel cans to keep your tanks moving. The German army, with its brilliant tactics and magnificent machines, was ultimately defeated by this promise. They were defeated by a system that could deliver millions of these simple steel boxes to the right place at the right time. The race across France was not won by Patton. It was won by the anonymous, exhausted driver of a deuce and a half, his truck filled with jerrycans, roaring through the night on a road called the Red Ball Express. It was the victory of a nation that understood that the greatest weapon of all is not the ability to fight, but the ability to move. And it was a victory powered by the simple, undeniable, and world-changing power of a full tank of gas.